October 6th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Leopold Canal in Belgium, but it brings no light, only a gray, suffocating mist clinging to the freezing black water. The terrain is a desolate moonscape of flooded polders, skeletal trees, and mud that acts like quicksand. On the southern bank, a platoon from the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade lies prone in the reeds, weapons trained on a heavy concrete bunker complex across the canal. Minutes ago, a final opportunity was offered, a chance for the German garrison to lay down their arms and avoid annihilation. The answer comes not in words, but in the violent, ripping tear of an MG-42 machine gun shredding the water's surface. The German major commanding the sector has made his choice. He believes his concrete fortress is impregnable. He believes the freezing canal is a moat that cannot be crossed. He is wrong. The Canadian commander lowers his binoculars, his expression grim but unsurprised. He signals to the rear, where the low rumble of engines begins to grow. The infantry steps aside. The Wasps, armored carriers mounted with heavy flamethrowers, roll forward to the water's edge. By late September 1944, the euphoria of the summer liberation has dissolved into a cold, hard reality. The Allied dash across France and Belgium, once unstoppable, has ground to a screeching halt. The reason is not a lack of courage, but a lack of gasoline. The rapid advance from Normandy to the German border has stretched supply lines to their breaking point. The Red Ball Express, the endless truck convoy ferrying supplies from the Normandy beaches, is burning more fuel delivering the supplies than the supplies themselves contain. The great Allied war machine is running on fumes. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery know that the war cannot be won without a deep-water port close to the front lines. The beaches of Normandy are too far away. The smaller French ports are destroyed or too low capacity. There is only one prize that matters, the port of Antwerp in Belgium. It is one of the largest ports in Europe, capable of handling the tens of thousands of tons of daily supplies needed to invade the German heartland. In a stroke of tactical brilliance and immense luck, the British 11th Armored Division captured the city of Antwerp intact on September 4th. The docks, the cranes, and the locks were secured before the retreating Germans could demolish them. It seems like the solution to the Allied supply crisis is in hand. But in the rush to secure the city and chase the retreating enemy, a catastrophic strategic oversight occurs. While the Allies celebrate in the cafes of Antwerp, the German 15th Army is quietly slipping away to the north and west, digging in along the banks of the Scheldt Estuary. Antwerp sits 50 miles inland. To reach the North Sea, ships must travel down the Scheldt River, and controlling the mouth of that river on both the north and south banks are thousands of German troops who have turned the estuary into a gauntlet of steel and concrete. As long as the Germans hold the banks, the port of Antwerp is useless, a tea kettle without a spout. The Royal Navy cannot sweep the mines in the river while heavy coastal batteries rain shells down on them. The supply ships cannot enter. The war effort begins to suffocate. The failure to clear the Scheldt immediately after taking Antwerp allows the German High Command to reinforce the area. Adolf Hitler, sensing a chance to delay the Allied advance into Germany by months, designates the Scheldt a fortress. He orders the 15th Army to hold the estuary to the last man. They flood the lowlands, mine the dikes, and sight their artillery on every approach route. They know that if they can deny the Allies the use of Antwerp, they might just stall the invasion long enough to develop their wonder weapons or force a negotiated peace. The task of breaking this deadlock falls to the 1st Canadian Army, often referred to as the Cinderella Army of the Allied forces. The Canadians are frequently assigned the unglamorous, high-casualty operations that other armies avoid. Under the command of General Harry Crerar, and temporarily led by the ruthless and innovative Lieutenant General Guy Simons, the Canadians are a unique mix of volunteers and weary veterans. They have fought through the hills of Sicily, the streets of Ortona, and the hedgerows of Normandy. Now they are handed a mission that many consider impossible: clear the heavily fortified banks of the Scheldt, where the enemy is dug in, and the very land itself has been weaponized against them. The Canadian sector is on the left flank of the Allied line, a position that places them squarely against the coast. They are tasked with clearing the Breskens pocket on the south bank of the Scheldt. This is not a battle of sweeping armored maneuvers or open fields. This is a battle for a strip of land that is actually below sea level, protected by a complex network of ancient dikes and canals. The Canadians are about to enter a world where the distinction between land and water has been erased, and where a determined enemy waits in concrete bunkers, knowing that the only way out is death or surrender. As October begins, the pressure from Supreme Headquarters is immense. Eisenhower sends a message to Montgomery stating that Antwerp must be opened. The Canadians are the sledgehammer chosen to crack the German lock, but before they can even reach the estuary, they must cross the Leopold Canal, a long, straight scar of water that the Germans have turned into a killing zone. The battlefield the Canadians are staring down is known as the Breskens Pocket. It is a roughly rectangular slice of land on the southern bank of the Scheldt, about 20 miles long and 10 miles deep. But calling it land is a generous exaggeration. The Germans, in a calculated act of environmental warfare, have blown the sluice gates and shattered the dikes. The North Sea has rushed back in, reclaiming the polders that Dutch farmers had spent centuries draining. What remains is a nightmarish archipelago of mud and flooded fields, where the water is waist-deep and freezing. The only dry ground consists of the tops of the dikes, narrow, elevated roadways that crisscross the terrain like a spider web. These dikes are the only avenues of movement, which makes them fatal traps. Every intersection, every straight stretch of road has been pre-sighted by German artillery and mortars. To step off the dike is to drown in the mud. To stay on the dike is to be a silhouette against the gray sky, a perfect target for a sniper. Defending this waterlogged fortress is the German 64th Infantry Division. Allied intelligence initially underestimates them, dismissing them as a stomach battalion, a unit formed from soldiers with ulcers or hearing problems, fit only for static defense. This is a deadly mistake. While the division contains some convalescents, its core is hardened steel. They are led by General Knut Eberding, a disciplinarian and a veteran of the Eastern Front who understands exactly how to use the terrain to his advantage. Eberding has turned the Breskens pocket into a defensive masterpiece. He has integrated the concrete bunkers of the Atlantic Wall into a defense-in-depth system. His machine gunners are dug into the reverse slopes of the dikes, making them invisible until the attackers are nearly on top of them. He has stockpiled ammunition and food. Most importantly, he has instilled a grim fatalism in his men. They know there is no retreat across the Scheldt. They are trapped with their backs to the sea, and Eberding's orders are explicit. Hold the position. Do not surrender. Make the enemy pay for every meter of mud with blood. Facing them is the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. By October 1944, they are known as the Water Rats. They were the first ashore at Juno Beach on D-Day, and they have been fighting almost continuously for 4 months. They are masters of amphibious warfare, battered and exhausted, suffering from a chronic shortage of infantry reinforcements. The zombie crisis in Canada, political hesitation to send conscripts overseas, means that the rifle companies are under strength. Every loss is felt acutely because there is no one coming to replace the fallen. The tactical problem facing the Canadian commanders is horrifyingly simple. To get into the Breskens pocket, they must cross the Leopold Canal. It acts as a massive moat protecting the German front line, roughly 100 feet wide, deep, and filled with stagnant water. The northern bank, held by the Germans, is slightly higher than the southern bank, giving the defenders a commanding view. They have cleared the vegetation on the Canadian side to create perfect killing zones. There is no room for maneuvering. There is no possibility of a flanking attack, as the pocket is surrounded by water on 3 sides. The Canadians have to launch a frontal assault, paddling canvas assault boats across open water into the teeth of prepared machine gun fire. It is a suicide mission reminiscent of the First World War, but fought with modern automatic weapons. The tension in the Canadian lines is palpable. They know the enemy across the water is watching them. They can hear the German sentries coughing in the mist. The Canadians are professional soldiers who want to finish the job and go home, but they are about to engage in a brawl that will require a level of ruthlessness they have rarely tapped into. The refusal of the German officers to consider surrender, even when the strategic situation is hopeless, shifts the Canadian mindset from liberation to annihilation. The stage is set for a collision of wills, where the only currency is violence. To understand the ferocity of what happens next, we must look into the eyes of the men shivering in the mud on the southern bank. The soldiers of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division are not the fresh-faced boys who stormed Juno Beach in June. By October, they are hardened, exhausted survivors. They call themselves the Water Rats, a badge of honor earned in the flooded fields of the Low Countries. Their reality is a wet, rotting misery. For weeks they have not been dry. Foot rot is rampant. Their uniforms are caked with the gray clay of the Scheldt, stiff and heavy. But beneath the physical exhaustion lies a deep, cynical bitterness regarding the politics back home. The Canadian Army is suffering a severe infantry shortage. In Canada, thousands of conscripted soldiers, derisively called zombies, are kept on home defense duties due to political hesitation to send them overseas. The men at the front know this. They know that if they fall, there is no one coming to take their place. This knowledge strips away any romantic notions of glory. They fight not for flag or country, but for the man in the trench next to them, and to simply survive the day. They have become ruthlessly efficient, conserving their energy for the moments that matter, and showing little patience for an enemy that prolongs the war unnecessarily. Across the canal, the perspective is radically different, but equally desperate. The German 64th Infantry Division is not a broken rabble. Under General Knut Eberding, they have absorbed the fortress doctrine completely. Eberding is a commander of the old Prussian school, cold, professional, and unyielding. He has established his headquarters in a concrete bunker deep within the pocket, issuing orders that leave no room for interpretation. For the average German lancer in the Breskens pocket, the psychology is complex. Many know the war is lost. They have seen the Allied armadas and felt the crushing weight of air superiority. But they are also trapped. To their rear lies the freezing expanse of the Scheldt Estuary. To their front, the Canadians. British propaganda leaflets dropped by air promise fair treatment, but fear and discipline hold the line. The SS detachments and hardcore officers like the major in the Leopold Canal sector enforce a brutal binary: fight or be executed for cowardice. This creates a dangerous enemy, men who are fighting with the frantic energy of rats cornered in a trap. They are not fighting to win the war anymore. They are fighting to make their inevitable defeat as costly as possible. To break this stalemate, the Canadians turned to a weapon that embodies the terrifying evolution of battlefield technology, the Wasp. The Wasp is a modification of the standard universal carrier, a small, tracked, open-topped vehicle that can traverse the boggy ground where tanks would sink. But instead of carrying troops or supplies, the Wasp carries a 75-gallon tank of thickened fuel and a projector gun mounted on the front hull. It is a mobile flamethrower, capable of shooting a lance of liquid fire over 100 yards. In the claustrophobic terrain of the Scheldt, the Wasp is not just a weapon of destruction. It is a psychological sledgehammer. A bullet can miss. Shrapnel is random. But a jet of flame is visceral and primal. The sound alone, a roaring, hissing shriek, is often enough to break the nerve of defenders. For the Canadians, the Wasp solves a geometric problem: how to kill an enemy hidden inside a concrete box without exposing yourself to his fire. The flame can curl around corners, pour through firing slits, and consume the oxygen inside a bunker in seconds. It is a horrific way to wage war, but for the infantry tasked with the impossible, it is the only equalizer they have. Alongside the Wasp, the Canadians deploy the LVT Buffalo. These are massive, boxy, amphibious tractors originally designed for the Pacific theater. In the flooded polders of the Scheldt, they are a godsend. They can swim through the deep water and crawl up the muddy banks, carrying 30 men at a time. They allow the Canadians to bypass the lethal dike roads and strike from the water, turning the flooding, the Germans' greatest ally, against them. The tactical reality on the ground, however, remains a brutal exercise in rat warfare. The battle is not fought over miles, but over inches. The dikes are elevated, meaning the Germans on top can look down into the Canadian positions. To advance, a Canadian platoon has to crawl up the slippery, mine-laden slope of a dike, assault a machine gun nest head-on, and then hold that narrow strip of pavement against immediate counterattacks. It is a contest of grenades, bayonets, and shovels. There is no cover. If a soldier raises his head, he is dead. If he digs a foxhole, he hits water within a foot. The Canadians are forced to live and fight in a slurry of cold mud and human waste. This environment strips away the rules of civilized warfare. When a German commander, safe in his dry bunker, refuses to surrender, he is not just making a tactical decision. He is condemning the shivering, mud-soaked Canadians to another night of hell. And that decision provokes a fury that will define the climax of the battle. The Canadians are done asking. The Wasps are fueled. The artillery coordinates are locked. The time for negotiation has passed. The waiting ends at first light on October 6th. The signal flares hiss into the gray sky, and the southern bank of the Leopold Canal erupts. But it is not the dull thud of artillery that starts the show. It is the shrieking roar of the Wasps. 27 flame-throwing carriers concealed behind the dike wall simultaneously raise their projectors over the berm. In a coordinated volley, they unleash a solid sheet of liquid fire across the water. The effect is apocalyptic. The flame doesn't just burn, it rolls like a fluid wave, crashing into the northern bank, incinerating the reeds, the trees, and the camouflage netting of the German positions. The heat is so intense that the canal water itself steams. For a few terrifying seconds, the German machine gun positions are silenced, the defenders forced to cower at the bottom of their trenches to avoid being cooked alive. In that brief window of stunned silence, The men of the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade, specifically the Canadian Scottish and the Regina Rifles, launch their assault boats. They paddle frantically through the smoke and steam, their boots slipping on the wet canvas floors. The crossing takes less than 2 minutes, but to the men in the boats, it feels like a lifetime. As the prows of the boats hit the mud on the northern bank, the shock of the flamethrowers wears off. The German response is instantaneous and ferocious. The 64th Division has practiced for this exact moment. Flare pistols pop, bathing the canal in harsh magnesium light. Machine guns that survive the inferno open up, churning the water into a frothy mix of blood and mud. Mortars, pre-sighted on the canal crossing points, begin to walk their fire back and forth along the water's edge. The Canadians scramble up the steep, slick 45-degree slope of the dike, digging their fingers into the mud to pull themselves up. They are met with grenades rolling down from the top. The fighting devolves instantly into a savage close-quarters brawl. Men grapple in the dark, using knives and bayonets, fighting for control of single-slit trenches. Against all odds, the Canadians secure 2 narrow bridgeheads, but they are tiny, mere slivers of land, barely a few hundred yards wide and deep. They have crossed the moat, but they have not breached the castle. This is where the refusal of the German command becomes lethal. The major in the heavy bunker complex behind the first line of dikes has not panicked. He orders his reserves to counterattack immediately. The Germans do not wait to regroup. They charge straight into the Canadian positions, utilizing the network of dry ditches to infiltrate the lines. The Canadians find themselves pinned against the canal, with the water at their backs and a wall of fire in front of them. Radio operators scream for support, but the bridgehead is too shallow for artillery. The shells would land on their own men. The wounded cannot be evacuated. Supplies cannot be brought across. The Canadians are trapped in a death box, taking heavy casualties from a concrete strong point that sits just out of reach, commanded by an officer who intends to bury them all in the polders. The battle hangs by a thread. The Canadians need a breakthrough, or they will be pushed back into the canal. The stalemate at the bridgehead cannot last. The Canadians are bleeding out. The German major's bunker complex, commanding the high ground of the dike intersection, is the linchpin holding the entire German defense together. As long as it stands, the bridgehead is a killing zone. Brigadier J.C. Sprague, commanding the 7th Brigade, realizes that finesse is no longer an option. He orders the gloves to be taken off. He calls for Uncle Targets, a term used by Allied artillery for a massive coordinated barrage involving every available gun in the divisional and corps artillery. The sky behind the Canadian lines tears open. Hundreds of shells scream overhead, slamming into the area around the bunker complex. It is not precision fire, it is an erasure of the grid square. The earth shakes so violently that men on both sides of the canal are thrown to the ground. The barrage churns the mud, detonating mines and collapsing trenches. But concrete is stubborn. As the dust settles, the bunker remains. The machine guns inside open up again, defiant. The Canadian response is a grim adaptation of combined arms warfare. They bring the Wasps across. Using improvised rafts and sheer muscle, engineers float the heavy flamethrower carriers across the canal under fire. As they claw their way up the muddy bank, the infantry provides suppressing fire, risking their lives to keep the German heads down for just a few seconds. A single Wasp crests the dike. It lumbers forward, tracks spinning in the muck until it is within 50 yards of the major's command bunker. The gunner aligns the projector. He doesn't fire a burst. he empties the tank. A solid stream of napalm smashes into the firing slit. The flame doesn't just enter the room, it consumes the air, creating a vacuum that sucks the fire deep into the subterranean chambers. Simultaneously, Canadian infantry sections, armed with satchel charges, bags of TNT, rush the blind spots. They throw the explosives into the ventilation shafts and the rear entrances. The explosions are muffled, heavy thumps that crack the concrete foundations. The resistance from the bunker ceases instantly. The fall of the strong point breaks the spine of the local defense. The German soldiers in the surrounding foxholes, witnessing the incineration of their impregnable fortress, begin to waver. The fanaticism instilled by their officers evaporates in the face of such overwhelming violence. The water rats surge forward, pouring through the gap in the line. They fan out along the dikes, clearing the trenches with Sten guns and grenades. The breakthrough is messy and chaotic, but it is decisive. The Canadians have punched a hole in the containment wall of the Breskens pocket. They begin to roll up the German flank, moving from dike to dike, driving the defenders back towards the sea. The German major's refusal to surrender has resulted not in a heroic last stand, but in the total destruction of his command. The collapse of the Leopold Canal line triggers a domino effect across the Breskens pocket. With their primary defensive belt shattered, the German 64th Infantry Division begins to disintegrate. General Eberding's fortress has been breached, and the Canadians flood into the rear areas. The fighting remains fierce. Isolated groups of Germans continue to obey the fight to the death order, but the cohesion is gone. On November 2nd, the inevitable conclusion arrives. General Eberding, the man who ordered his troops to hold every inch of mud, is found in his headquarters in the seaside town of Knockaheist. He surrenders to the Canadians. The image is striking. The pristine, polished German general stepping out of his bunker, contrasting sharply with the filthy, mud-caked Canadian soldiers who have spent a month living like animals to reach him. The scale of the surrender is staggering. As the news of Eberding's capture spreads, German resistance evaporates. Long columns of prisoners, gray ghosts with hands clasped behind their heads, begin to snake their way back along the dikes they had defended so ferociously. In total, the Canadians capture over 12,000 German soldiers in the Scheldt operation. It is a massive haul, larger than many entire Allied divisions. But the cost of this victory is etched into the casualty lists. The Battle of the Scheldt has cost the 1st Canadian Army over 6,300 casualties. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, the Water Rats, have suffered disproportionately. Whole platoons have been wiped out. The names of the dead fill the cemeteries at Eberding and Bergen op Zoom. The psychological toll is equally heavy. The soldiers have endured conditions that rival the worst of Passchendaele in World War I. Constant wetness, trench foot, and the unique horror of fighting over ground that is half water. The immediate aftermath is a scene of utter exhaustion. There is no cheering, no parades. The Canadian soldiers simply stop. They sit on the dikes, smoking cigarettes, watching the prisoners march by. They are too tired to celebrate. They have done the job that no one else wanted, and they have done it against an enemy who forced them to be merciless. With the banks of the Scheldt finally cleared, the Royal Navy begins the hazardous task of sweeping the estuary. For weeks, over 100 minesweepers trawl the river, detonating the contact mines that had choked the shipping lane. It is a slow, dangerous process, but on November 28th, 1944, the first convoy of Liberty ships glides up the river, unmolested. The lead ship, the Canadian-built Fort Cataraqui, docks in Antwerp to the sound of cheering crowds and a military band. But the true significance of this moment is not in the pageantry. It is in the cargo holds. Thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, and rations begin to flow into the European theater. The tea kettle finally has its spout. The opening of Antwerp ends the Allied supply crisis. It provides the logistical backbone necessary to withstand the upcoming German offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, and fuels the final drive across the Rhine into the heart of the Reich. Tactically, the battle validates the specialized armor of the 79th Armored Division. The Wasp flamethrowers and Buffalo amphibious vehicles prove to be the only effective solution for dislodging a dug-in enemy from flooded terrain. The operation rewrites the book on amphibious warfare, demonstrating that even with the sea weaponized against them, a mechanized force can maneuver if it has the right tools. However, the victory leaves a bitter aftertaste for the Canadians. The Battle of the Scheldt remains largely overshadowed by the failure of Market Garden and the drama of the Battle of the Bulge. The men who fought in the freezing mud of the Breskens pocket feel their sacrifice is ignored by the history books and the public back home. They fought one of the most difficult, technically complex battles of the entire war, unlocking the door to victory, yet they remain the Cinderella Army, doing the dirty work so others could claim the glory. The operation also marks a shift in the psychological hardening of the Canadian forces. The refusal of German officers like the major at the Leopold Canal to surrender when the situation was hopeless taught the Canadians a dark lesson. Mercy is a luxury that cannot always be afforded. The water rats emerge from the Scheldt not just as victors, but as a force that has looked into the abyss of total war and learned how to survive it. Today, the banks of the Leopold Canal are quiet. The polders have been drained, the dikes rebuilt, and the farmers have returned to the fields. If you were to walk along the canal path on a misty October morning, you would find it hard to believe that this tranquil waterway was once the setting for one of the most vicious battles of the Second World War. But beneath the neatly plowed furrows, the soil is still filled with the rusted iron of conflict, shrapnel, casing brass, and the concrete bones of shattered bunkers. The story of the Breskens pocket is a stark reminder of the brutality of a war of attrition. It reveals the terrible calculus of command. When an enemy refuses to yield, the only option left is total destruction. The German major's refusal to surrender did not change the outcome of the war. It only dictated the method of his defeat. It forced the Canadians to abandon the conventions of soldiering and embrace the mechanics of annihilation. The water rats of the 3rd Canadian Division did not fight for glory. They were not the subject of newsreels in the same way as the paratroopers at Arnhem or the tank crews of Patton's 3rd Army. Their war was wet, cold, and anonymous. They were the Cinderella Army, given the jobs that no one else could do, in the places no one else wanted to go. Yet without their sacrifice in the mud of the Scheldt, the Allied armies would have strangled on their own success, and the liberation of Europe might have stalled indefinitely. History often remembers the great sweeping maneuvers and the charismatic generals. It tends to forget the wet, miserable battles for nameless dikes and flooded fields. But it was here, in the freezing water of the Leopold Canal, that the war was truly won, inch by bloody inch, by men who simply refused to stop until the job was done.